I remember the exact moment everything changed because it started like a normal morning and turned into something I still think about every time I sit outside and look at the lake in front of my house. I had just stepped out onto the deck with a cup of coffee, enjoying the quiet water and the kind of peace you only get when you live away from the noise, when I noticed a truck slowly pulling up near M. Y driveway. At first, I thought it was just a delivery or maybe someone lost, but then another vehicle came right behind it, and then another, and that is when I knew something was not right, because people do not just show up like that unless they think they have a reason. Before I could even walk down to see what was going on, I saw a group of workers stepping out carrying tools and equipment, and right behind them was the same HOA woman who had been sending me notices for weeks. The kind that look off style but never really say anything. Clear she walked like she owned the place, like my $10 million Lakefront estate was just another property on her checklist, and without even greeting me, she started pointing around, giving instructions to the workers, like I was not even standing there. I walked closer and asked what exactly she thought she was doing on my property, and she looked at me with that same confident expression and said they were there to correct violations and begin necessary changes. I asked her again to explain what violations, because everything on my property had been approved long ago and nothing had changed, but she ignored that completely and kept talking about community standards and rules, like repeating those words would suddenly make her actions legal. At that point, I realized this was not going to be a normal conversation, because she had already made up her mind and the workers had already started unloading equipment, which meant she believed she had full authority to be there. And that is when I told her clearly that she needed to stop everything and leave immediately, because she did not have permission to be on my property, and she definitely did not have permission to make any changes. Instead of backing down, she pulled out her phone and said if I did not cooperate, she would escalate the situation, and I told her calmly to do whatever she thought was necessary, because I knew I had done nothing wrong. And that is when she made the call. She stepped aside, and within seconds I heard her say that she needed police assistance because a homeowner was refusing to comply with HOA enforcement and might become uncooperative. And I just stood there listening, because in that moment I realized she had no idea what she was actually setting in motion. If you are enjoying this kind of real story where things take a serious turn, make sure you like and subscribe to HOA Revenge Files, because stories like this are more common than people think, and they always have a twist you do not see coming. After she made that call, she came back with even more confidence, like she had just secured victory, and told the workers to continue preparing because the police would handle any resistance. And that was the moment I decided to step back and let everything play out. Because arguing was not going to change anything. Now it was just a matter of time before reality showed up. The workers looked unsure at this point. Some of them were quietly talking among themselves. Beck, Oz, even they could feel something was off, but they kept moving slowly, not fully committing to starting any actual work. And the HOA woman kept walking around, pointing at parts of the house, mentioning changes that made no sense, things that were already approved or not even under OA control. But she spoke like someone who believed no one would question her. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance, and the sound got closer until 2 police vehicles pulled up near the entrance of my property, and everything became very quiet. The workers stepped back immediately, and even the HOA woman paused for a second before straightening herself and walking forward, like she was about to prove a point. 2 officers stepped out calm and professional and walked toward us, their eyes scanning everything. The workers, the equipment, the house, and then they looked at me and asked what was going on. Before I could answer, the HOA woman jumped in, explaining that I was violating multiple AO rules and refusing to comply with enforcement actions, and that they needed assistance to proceed. The officers listened carefully but did not react the way she expected. One of them asked her a simple question: do you have legal authorization to enter this property and carry out these actions? And for the first time, her tone changed slightly. She started talking about HOA authority and community guidelines, but she could not provide anything that actually answered the question directly. That is when one of the OCHU officers turned to me and asked for my side, and I explained everything clearly: how the notices were vague, how no proper violations were ever confirmed, and how they showed up without permission, ready to make changes on private property. and I made it very clear that everything on my estate had been proved and documented. As the conversation continued, I could see the shift happening. The officers started asking more detailed questions, requesting documents, and verifying information, and the more they looked into it, the clearer it became that this situation was not what it seemed at first. Workers slowly started backing away from their equipment, and the confidence that once filled the air began to disappear. The HOA woman tried to regain control, repeating that she was acting in the best interest of the community, but now her words sounded uncertain because she was no longer the one asking questions, she was the one being questioned. And that change was something everyone standing there could feel without a single word being said. Neighbors had started gathering at a distance, watching quietly, because the neighbors kept watching from a distance, because by now it was clear this was not a normal HOA situation. This had turned into something much bigger, and you could feel that shift in the air. The officers continued asking questions, and one of them stepped aside to make a quick call, while the other stayed focused on the HOA woman, asking her again to provide any legal document that allowed her to enter private property and start work without the owner's consent. And this time she had nothing solid to show. Her voice lost that earlier confidence, and she started repeating the same lines about community rules and responsibilities. But now it sounded different. It sounded like someone trying to hold on to control that was already slipping away, and the workers were no longer pretending to stay busy. They had completely stopped and were just waiting to see what would happen next. Minutes later, the officer who had stepped aside came back and spoke quietly to his partner, and then both of them turned toward the HOA woman and explained clearly that what she had done was not within her authority. They told her that no OA has the right to enter a property and begin structural or physical changes without proper legal process and homeowner consent. And hearing that out loud changed everything instantly. You could see it on her face, the realization that this situation had gone too far, and that the decision to call the police had completely backfired. The same call she thought would give her control had now taken it away from her and placed everything under scrutiny. The officers then instructed everyone to stop all activity immediately, and they made it clear that the workers needed to leave the property right away without touching anything further. The workers did not hesitate. They began packing up their tools quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact, because at that point, they understood they had been brought into something they should not have been. Part of the HOA woman tried one last time to defend her actions, saying she was only trying to enforce standards and protect the neighborhood. But the response she got was calm and firm. They told her that authority has limits and that rules do not override property rights, and that crossing that line could lead to serious consequences. At that point, she went silent, completely silent, because there was nothing left she could say that would change what was happening. The situation had turned fully against her, and everyone there could see it clearly. The officers then began documenting everything. They took notes. They asked for copies of the notices that had been sent. They reviewed the situation step by step and made sure every detail of what happened that day was recorded properly. And the more they documented, the more serious it became, because now it was not just a misunderstanding, it was an official record. Standing there watching all of this unfold, I felt something shift, not just around me, but inside me as well, because this was no longer about a disagreement with an HOA. This was about standing firm when someone tries to overstep their boundaries and assume control. They do not actually have the neighbors who had gathered earlier were still watching, but now their expressions had changed. What started as curiosity had turned into understanding, because they were seeing firsthand what happens when power is misused and challenged the right way. After everything was documented, the officers turned back to me and reassured me that I had done the right thing by not escalating the situation and by letting them handle it properly. They made it clear that if anything like this happened again, I should report it immediately, and that the actions taken today would be reviewed further. The HOA representatives slowly stepped back and began leaving the property without saying much, because there was nothing left to argue. Everything they believed they controlled had been taken out of their hands in a matter of minutes, and now they had to deal with the consequences of those decisions. Once everyone left and the noise settled, the property returned to the same quiet state it had been in that morning. The lake was calm again, the air felt still and peaceful, but the feeling was different now because what had just happened was not something you forget easily later. That evening I sat outside facing the water, thinking about how quickly things can change when someone assumes they have more power than they actually do, and how important it is to stand your ground when you know you are right, because if you do not, people like that will keep pushing further every time. This whole experience is exactly why I share stories like this on HOA Revenge Files, because people need to see that these situations are real and that they can be handled the right way without losing control or making things worse. If you have ever dealt with something similar or seen someone try to abuse their authority, I want you to share your experience in the comments, because these stories matter and they help others understand what to do when they face something like this. And if this story made you think or reminded you of anything you have seen before, make sure you share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes one story is enough to change how someone handles a situation like this in the future.